Yes, you on Facebook Live. I'm constantly surprised. Okay, hello everybody. My name is Heather Butts with the organization Help for Youth. It is my honor and pleasure to have Adam DePaul here, and I'm going to hand it over to Adam to do introductions and talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing today, and I'm going to get right into it. So thank you, Adam. I'm handing it over to you.
Thank you, Heather. And thank you everybody for showing up. This is a wonderful crowd. I know that kind of liminal space between the holidays and the New Year's can be tough to get people around. So I'm really thrilled that there are so many people here. And again, thank you, Heather, for arranging this. I'm very happy to be speaking to you all. It's very important for our people to have the opportunity to tell our story, to talk about our people. And I'll explain exactly why that is. Some reasons are obvious and some not so much. But I want to give you a brief history and a brief history of our people and bring you up to the present, let you know what our people are doing today. I want to let you know who the Lenape people are and who I am and who I'm here today representing. But then I'm very interested in turning it over to you and hearing what interests you and directing the conversation that way. I much prefer a conversation to a lecture. So please, anything that interests you, feel free to ask about it. Anything I touch on, but you want to hear more about, or something I don't touch on at all. But to give you some background information, I'm going to start. I like to start with our relationship with William Penn. Well, actually, the first place I should start is telling you that the Lenape people are the indigenous people of Eastern Pennsylvania, Southern New York State, all of New Jersey, and Northern Delaware. This is what is often called the Lenape Hoking, the place of the Lenape. So that's our indigenous homeland. And when I tell our history, I like to start with our relationship with William Penn. And the reason I start there, of course, I can, and sometimes I do, talk for hours on life before colonialism. But since we have a relatively short time, I like to try to hit on the stuff that you don't usually see in your average Native American museum or exhibit. Very often, not just the Lenape, but all Native American people, very often we are treated in ways that even though they can be genuine and respectful, they have a tendency to frame us as artifacts of the past, right? You go to a Lenape exhibit or you learn something about Native Americans in school or in class, or you go to a program and you hear about these people that lived a long time ago and how they used to do things and what life was like back then. And that's important. We need to know our history. We need to learn from our history. But it's very important to bring us up to the present and to emphasize that even though many history books drop off talking about us after colonialism, that we continued to live here and we're still here today. So feel free to ask me about pre-colonial times. But I want to start with William Penn because many people hear that we had a good relationship with William Penn. And people ask me about this. And I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself one more step. I should tell you who I am. I'm the Chief of Education and the Tribal Storykeeper for the Lenape Nation of Pennsylvania. We're called the Lenape Nation of Pennsylvania because we are based in Pennsylvania. We started our nation in Pennsylvania, but that doesn't mean that we are only relevant to Pennsylvania. We have members in New York, New Jersey, all throughout the country, and Lenape who have moved to other countries too. And I'll explain to you about the different Lenape nations, where they are today and why there are more than one Lenape nation. But that's my nation, the Lenape Nation of Pennsylvania. And people ask me about this supposed good relationship with William Penn. And they're right to do so. We know today more than ever that when we hear things that sound romanticized or maybe too good to be true, that we should question that. But this is one thing that is true. The Lenape did have a good relationship with William Penn. Now, William Penn was not perfect by any means. William Penn was a subject of his time. If you look at his writings, he uses language and some references and ideas that we would not and should not excuse today. He did call us a godless people from time to time. Um, so by no means do I say everything he did was perfect. But for his time, he really was, and I don't think this is too strong a word, he really was a radical for the fair and respectful treatment of Native Americans, of the Lenape. One example I bring up to show this is uh, Penn, Penn made an effort to learn our language. And that is no easy effort for any English first speaker to do. Native American languages tend to be difficult for English speakers to learn. But Penn put a lot of effort into learning our language. And he thought he did. What he actually ended up learning is what linguists refer to as a trade jargon, a very watered down version of the language that is just effective enough to communicate important ideas, to be able to do business and live together. But still, he put a lot of effort into doing that. And the reason he did was because he noticed a very big problem that the Lenape people faced. People often ask me about the early treaties or agreements that our people signed with the colonists. And they look at these early agreements and they say, it looks like your people just signed away huge tracts of land and possessions. Why would they do this? Why would they enter into these agreements where they seemingly got almost nothing? And there's a number of reasons for that. One reason is that we never had a written language. Our language was only spoken. It was the colonists who came over, and primarily the missionaries who wanted to convert us into Christianity, that sent linguists and anthropologists to record our language so that they could write things like sermons and the Bible in Lenape to give to our people, to work with the efforts of converting us to Christianity. Before that, our language was not written. So we were unfamiliar with the entire idea of having written contracts and, signing your name on this piece of paper, and that then become a legally binding document. Just that concept was not something that we engaged with, so that was new to us. But of course, on top of that, to complicate that matter, was the language barrier. We were presented with these documents written in this language with which we had no familiarity, and we were really very much up to the mercy of the person telling us, well, this is what this paper says, and this is what's going to happen if you write at the bottom. Many of our people were being taken vast advantage of through these written documents and written treaties. And Penn realized this, and he wanted to put a stop to it. So Penn learned our language, or again, a watered down version of our language, and he trained his people in our language. And then Penn insisted that any dealings that his people had with us, he insisted that there be a Lenape interpreter there who could clearly communicate to us not just what the document said, but what the signing of the document actually meant. So we knew what we were getting into when we signed those documents. When he started doing that, you see those treaty and agreement signings in his territories sharply drop off, as you could imagine. But that's just one example of the lengths Penn went to try to treat us fairly and respectfully. If you're interested in that relationship, you can look up William Penn's letters. There's a book I actually use in my classes. It's got a long title. It's called William Penn's Own Account of the Lenape or Delaware Indians. William Penn's own account of the Lenape or Delaware Indians. And it's just a collection of facsimiles of his letters, all of which are in the public domain. So if you just search for Penn's letters, you can find them all out there. But if you read through those letters, you really do get a sense of the high respect and regard he had for our people. Again, not being perfect, and there being things that he could have worked on, but compared to other colonists of his time, really forward thinking. It was with William Penn's sons that our relationship turned drastically south. Within one generation, the spirit of Penn was really nullified with his sons. Penn's sons ushered in the era of our forced removals and far worse. If you've heard of the walking purchase, this was designed by Penn's sons. I'll talk about this very briefly. Again, feel free to ask more about any of this later when we get to question and answer. But the walking purchase, many people refer to it as the Lenape Trail of Tears. Although I understand why some people make that association, I really resist that description. The Trail of Tears was its own dire tragedy for another tribe that was not Lenape, so I don't like to appropriate that. But the walking purchase, basically, we agreed out of respect for William Penn, out of respect for the son's father, we said we would offer Penn's son some land. And we were happy to let them live among us, have a small family settlement. So we decided that what we would do is we would start at the Delaware River, and we would not walk in a northwesterly direction for a day and a half. And at the end of that day and a half, however far we had gotten walking together, we would draw a plot on the map and draw a line back to the Delaware River. And that triangle of land, with the Delaware River being the eastern border, that would be how much land we would give Penn's sons. There's a whole history of why we do these walking agreements. It would really let you get to know somebody who you were entering into an agreement with, let you talk with them. If it was long enough, it let you hunt with them, camp with them, and you could familiarize yourself with this person. So we agreed to this, but before the date came, Penn's sons did a number of things. First of all, they hired contractors to go out and clear the land in as long and straight a path as they could in what was still at that time this great northeastern wilderness. So they cut down the trees, the shrubs, the underbrush to make clear paths so the walkers weren't obstructed. Then they hired 3 professional runners from the colonial ranks to take part in this. So when we all got together that day and we began our walk, these 3 runners just took off running down these cleared running paths. And our people walked on for a couple minutes, not really understanding what was going on, until they finally realized that nobody was coming back to walk with them, and they sauntered off the path. But meanwhile, these runners ran. 2 of them had to stop out of exhaustion. They weren't able to run the full day and a half, but one of the runners did continue to run for the full day and a half. And where he ended up is where they drew that plot. And then as a final little, well, not little, but a final act of subversion, when the colonists drew that line on the map back to the Delaware, they literally tilted the map slightly so that angle would be more obtuse than it would have been otherwise. But a little tilt goes a long way when you're working on that kind of scale. So at the end of a day and a half, when we thought we were giving Penn's sons, a few acres to start a family settlement, we ended up losing an amount of land in the Lenape Hoking in eastern Pennsylvania about the size of Rhode Island state. So that's just one example of many underhanded agreements and treaty dealings that Penn's sons and their colonists did. It's one of the most famous. But once Penn's sons did this kind of thing, found a way to get land signed over to them through legitimate means or not, they had no reservation at all in the way that they would force us out. At our cultural center, which is in Easton, Pennsylvania, we have a wall-sized, blown-up facsimile of a 1700s Pennsylvania Gazette, where John Penn, Penn's son, publicizes prices that he will pay to colonists who bring in either Lenape scalps or live Lenape people to be brought in as slaves. He publicizes this to his people on the front page, and he has those bounties broken down by age and gender. So how much he will pay for a Lenape man over 10 years old, a woman over 10 years old, and how much he will pay for a Lenape male child under 10 years old and a female child under 10 years old. So it's at this point that our people are fleeing. We are being hunted, and those of us who can are running. And this is where our diaspora starts. So many of us during this period, many of the Lenape people did flee, and we went in all directions, north, south, east, anywhere we could go to feel, I'm sorry, not east, that would have been into the ocean, west, north, south, west, anywhere we could go to feel safe from colonialism. And, I encounter the mindset with my students sometimes that they conceive of these forced removals as a one-time event, right? Like one day the Lenape all picked up and they went out to Wisconsin and they settled down, and that's how their people were removed. But that's not at all how this worked for the Lenape people or for any Native American people. These relocations were a consistent, continual process that spanned years and decades, and in some case centuries, where our people might get out to Western Pennsylvania or maybe central New York or northern New York and look around and feel like, okay, they had gone far enough, and they would begin to settle and reestablish their communities. But then in a matter of time, colonialism would catch up with them and they'd be uprooted and chased out again. So they'd head out further or in a different direction. And this is the continual process that happened for many, many, many years, through which our people spread out all over the country and all over the continent. Now, some of those groups, some of our diaspora remained cohesive enough and in large enough groups that they eventually settled in communities that are still today recognized nations. And those groups are today in the areas of Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and one group got pushed just north over the United States border into Ontario, Canada. And today, those are where you find the federally recognized nations of the Lenape people today. The United States has 3 federally recognized nations, 2 in Oklahoma and 1 in Wisconsin. And in Canada, we have nations in Ontario that are recognized by the Canadian government. So that, and again, we have a short time and nothing I'm telling you really does justice to the history or to the plight of our people. This is all just cliff notes. But that's a very, very brief summary of our diaspora, of those Lenape who had to flee the Lenape-Hoking. Now, meanwhile, many other Lenape remained behind, remained in New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware. And there's a number of ways that could happen. Some of our people went into hiding into small groups. Many of our people were brought into agreements with plantation owners or large landowners that involved something like indentured servitude to be able to stay. But the primary way that we were able to stay was through marriages between colonists and Lenape women. Always in that direction. Lenape men were not permitted to stay and marry colonial women. That would have been an affront to the colonists in many ways. But colonial men seemed to take a very strong liking to marrying Lenape women. And there's a number of reasons for that: cultural differences, lifestyle differences, but probably the primary reason was that our women were the masters of the agricultural science of this area. They knew everything there was to know about how the land worked, what crops would raise and what wouldn't, how to till the soil, how to do planting in such a way that it worked harmoniously with the soil and the type of land we have, so that we wouldn't have to take up huge tracts of land and then move and do more tracts of land because last year's soil wouldn't produce again for 4 or 5 years. They knew how to make all that happen. And not only did they have that knowledge, but they did the work. They did every ounce of our agricultural work, from preparing the soil to planting the first seed, tilling, plowing, all the way into turning that into food for the community. The colonists, of course, were here on foreign soil. They had no idea what would raise here and what wasn't, what wouldn't, how the seasons worked. So those early colonists were very dependent on our women to be able to survive and thrive here the way they did, especially those first few years. So many colonial men married Lenape women and they raised Lenape families. Now, the caveat to that, when I say they raised Lenape families, that was mostly in blood. Well, I won't say in blood only, but as far as the community, as far as the colonies were concerned, if you stayed here, if you were one of those women who married a colonist, you became a colonist in every recognizable way. Our women who remained here, they couldn't speak Lenape. They couldn't speak their language in the colonies. They couldn't dress in their traditional dress. We certainly couldn't hold any ceremonies or religious practices. They were still considered heathen practices. We do have some records of some very, what you might call progressive or permissive households, where the patriarch of the family may have allowed his children to grow up bilingual, speak Lenape, maybe have a corn husk doll or some other remnants of the culture. But those examples are pretty few and far between, and they don't last very long. Pretty soon, and especially with the dawning of the era of Penn's sons, it is simply not okay and not safe to be or to show any Lenape culture in the Lenape-Hoking. So throughout this time, and for literally hundreds of years following, our women and the families they raised, and those other smaller groups who went into hiding or who went into indentured servitude, they passed our ways down in secret through the oral tradition, through mainly from grandparents to children. Very often in Lenape culture, it's the grandparents who take the lead in educating children. And this went on for generations and generations, for centuries, until really very historically recently. it really has not been very long that it that most of our people have felt safe publicly proclaiming that many of us are still here, many of us never left. Um, to put this into context, and this is something else I encounter with my students sometimes, they feel like all that civil rights stuff happened so long ago, right? Yeah, sure, once upon a time, we read in the history books that relations weren't good in America, but we know that was a long time ago. To emphasize how recent this is, we still have elders in our communities who remember being taken from their families and put into what are known as the Indian boarding schools. If you're not familiar with this phenomenon, they've gained some publicity as of late, particularly the Carlisle School and some schools in Canada. They've been doing some recent excavations there, and they've made the news. But if this hasn't hit your radar, these Indian boarding schools, these are places that the colonists set up, and they would bring Native American children into them voluntarily sometimes, but many times by force. Children would be forcibly removed from their native families and brought into these schools. And the mission of these schools, their moniker, the way they advertised themselves, was they said, kill the Indian, save the man. And those aren't my words. That is, again, the tagline that these schools would use, meaning that they would train these children not to be native. They would train all the native custom and heritage out of them so that the children would come out good colonists and able to participate in a civilized society. We still have elders who went through this. So this is still in our living memory. You know, we're talking about, I tell my students, we're talking about your grandparents, maybe your great grandparents. But eventually, our people who remained here in hiding and in secret for so long, they finally did feel that it was time to come out, time to publicly proclaim our nations, let people know that many of us were here and never left, and that we're still here and we are still carrying on our culture. So this is the heritage of my nation, the Lenape Nation of Pennsylvania. We are one nation who is largely represented by these Lenape who never left, who remained here in their homeland. And we're not the only nation. We have two nations in New Jersey, the Ramapo Mountain Lenape and the Nanticoke Lenni Lenape. And we also have a nation in Delaware State. All of these nations are largely represented by the Lenape who never left, who remained here. So that's where I'm coming from today. I'm a member of Tribal Council, and like I said, I'm Chief of Education and Tribal Storykeeper. And today, our nations, all of our nations, but of course I can speak most directly to my own, we work to continue and revitalize our culture. We still hold our traditional ceremonies. We govern ourselves in our traditional ways. We have a circle of chiefs and clan mothers and tribal council. We practice our traditions and we work to revitalize those parts of our culture that were most devastated by the hiding times, by colonialism. And one example that I like to bring up about that is our language. The Lenape language is incredibly endangered. In fact, by linguistic standards, it's in a category below endangered. It's considered latent. Back in 2008, we did a program, I'm sorry, not a program, we put together an exhibit with the University of Pennsylvania, and it was a wonderful exhibit. And at that time, Penn credited only a handful of people in the world with being able to speak the Lenape language competently. And that's not to say fluently, and that is not to say native speakers. Those handful of people, and again, that was, what year is it? 15 years ago, something like that. Those were people who had relearned their own language that had been taken from them through the little they could get from their elders and documents that had been written. So incredibly, our language was incredibly devastated, not lost, but that's how bad the situation had gotten. Now, excuse me. I am very personally, I am very lucky, and our nation is very lucky that one of those handful of people to whom Penn was referring was my mother and is my mother, Shelley DePaul, and she is now one of our clan mothers and our director of language. She has dedicated her life to bringing our language to our people. And today she teaches 5 classes a week online to anyone who will come and learn the language, our own people. We have a wonderful group, linguistic professors, anthropology professors, just members of the general public. I am a co-teacher of 1 or 2 of those classes. So revitalizing our culture is something we're very passionate about. And another thing, I would say one of our other strongest initiatives today is environmental preservation. It is inherent in everything it means to be Lenape, to live in harmony with all of our relations. And that is everything we live alongside that supports us. That's yes, the 2-leggeds, but also the 4-leggeds, the fish nation, the winged ones, the standing trees, the grandfather stones, all of our everything that supports us and everything we share space and life with. So we are very strongly directed today to continue our role as stewards of the Lenapehoking, of the Delaware River and the lands. And every one of our most wonderful initiatives in that regard are oh, sorry, saw a chat. And I'm almost done, and then I really look forward to having that conversation. But I like to bring up the Rising Nation River Journey. This is a trip we've been doing every 4 years since 2002. And we have a website. You can read a lot about the background and more on the journey on the website if you'd like to. But just to mention it very briefly, since 2002, we've been doing this. And what we do is we paddle down the Delaware River, usually for between 3 and 4 weeks. We begin at the mouth of the Delaware up in New York, around Hancock, New York, before the 2 branches come to make the official Delaware. And we paddle the river down through to Cape May, where it dumps into the ocean. And all along that trip, we stop to hold signings of a treaty that we designed called the Treaty of Renewed Friendship. And the treaty asks its signers mainly for 2 things. It asks that they acknowledge the Lenape people as the indigenous people of the Lenapehoking, of these lands. And it asks that they agree to be good stewards of the environment in whatever way they can. And when we began that in 2002, I believe we had 17 organizations sign. Some of our oldest signers are wonderful people like chapters of the Audubon Society, the Delaware River Keepers, wonderful environmental people and organizations. And throughout those years between the river journeys, we build those relationships into wonderful programs, environmental programs, things to raise awareness for people, educational programs like this, And like I said, I believe on that first journey, we had 17 organizations. This summer in 2018, we just held our 6th journey, which was our 20-year anniversary, because again, we do it every 4 years. And I have taken over as the coordinator of the journey back in 2018. I coordinated again this year. And at the end of this year's journey, we had over 100 organizations and over 300 individuals come together to sign, and it has just been an incredible bringing together of community to work towards Indigenous awareness and environmental stewardship. And through these relationships that we built through the river journey, we've been able to really, we've been invited into positions where we can really have direct effect on some of the issues that face our land. For instance, I am our nation's representative on the Council for the Lower Delaware Wild and Scenic Council. I'm also on the board of directors for the Friends of the Wissahickon, and this all came from relationships established through the river journey. So that is, again, very briefly, that's who I am. That's who the Lenape people are, and that's who my nation, the Lenape Nation of Pennsylvania, is. Who we were, how we got here, and what we're doing today. So please feel free to ask about anything. I very much look forward to having a conversation with you folks. Let me know what interests you, whether I just touched on it or whether I didn't touch on it at all, and I'm happy to talk about it.
That was incredible. I wrote down like 5 different topics that I feel came out of that. So as I mentioned when we were off camera, I definitely see part 2 in our future. I have a couple of questions, but I want to see if there are people in the audience that have questions first before I hop on in there. So if anybody has questions, you can come off mute or you can put them in the chat. And actually, while people are doing that, I will ask the river journey that you just mentioned, which, I mean, I'm sad we just missed that. But how does an organization sign up, and what are the requirements to be involved? I guess the next one is going to be in 2026.
Yes, 2026 is the next journey. There are really no requirements, and the treaty is not a legally binding contract. It's something that people enter into, like the name says, in a spirit of friendship. So as long as someone is committed to those 2 things, to acknowledging the Lenape people and to environmental stewardship, they're welcome to come sign. And then, throughout the years, we will collaborate on programs, even things like this, speaking engagements, whatever way. And I should also say, one of the beautiful things about the journey is that it's an opportunity for us to bring together and to network organizations that are working towards these things. So all down the river, our partner organizations will come and speak too, and they will let the public know what they're doing, what kind of environmental initiatives they have. Colleges will come and speak and about their Indigenous studies programs. So it's also a way to get that knowledge out to the public. Now, if an organization is interested in becoming a treaty signer, they don't necessarily have to wait until the next river journey. We can set that up in between the years as well. So organizations are free to get in touch about that.
Okay, great. The second question that I had was, and I mentioned this before. Oh, good. And I there's a question that came to me, so I'll ask that. The question I had is, I mentioned before that in various places that I have affiliations. We do the Lenape land acknowledgement, but I know that oftentimes people want to find other ways to acknowledge and recognize the Lenape people, Lenape Nation. How would you suggest people go about that? I mean, I also mentioned to you that how I first came to know you was I was doing some research about a project I'm doing, a native encampment which involves wigwam building. And then, I kind of said to myself, oh, we should probably make sure this is the way it should be going and so forth. So how would you suggest people go about honoring and recognizing, the Lenape Nation and people beyond the land acknowledgement if they're interested in that?
That's a great question. Land acknowledgements, they can be a wonderful thing, or they can be a problem. And our council has actually put together some guidance that we offer people when they write us and ask us about land acknowledgements. And the key land acknowledgements are great, and I do recommend that people consider adopting land acknowledgements. However, they need to be one step in the process of building a relationship with your Indigenous nation. Land acknowledgements become a problem when they become performative. Because often organizations can say, okay, well, we need to do something for Indigenous rights or maybe Native American Heritage Month. Let's all put this line at the end of our email signatures, and they all do. And then they're allowed to check that off because they did their part for that, and they don't have to think about Indigenous people anymore. That's the way that land acknowledgements can be a problem. So the answer to all of your question is get in touch with us. We are always willing to work with the public, with anyone who's interested in acknowledging the Lenape people, and that can look very different for very different people. I personally, as chief of education, I work with a lot of colleges and school districts on things like educational programs, curriculum development. If you are in a position of education, it's so important that you make sure, A, that you are teaching our story, and B, that if you are and when you are, that you're doing so authentically. And we are always willing to come out and help consult with that. Any place, historical societies, environmental organizations, community groups, we like having speakers come out and talk about our story, because Lenape culture has been incredibly erased here in the public consciousness. It's one of the biggest struggles we face. And that's why I said at the beginning, it really is important. I say, thank you, I'm happy to be here. But that's not just the obligatory, thank you, I'm happy to be here. It is really important for our people to be given a platform to tell our story, because our history has been so erased, and our presence has been so erased. So whether you're just an organization who wants to do a land acknowledgement, whether you want to set up a program, whether we consult on Lenape gardens. We have some elders who are very involved in our traditional medicinal plants and our foodways. We have Lenape gardens that we've put up at the University of Pennsylvania, at Haverford College. We're working on another one or two right now. If you're interested in getting involved with the language, any way that you'd like to involve yourself with our culture and our people is a wonderful way to support us. The key is getting in touch so you can do it with us, and in a way that is authentic.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm going to be in touch with you about the Lenape Gardens ASAP. So please stay tuned for that. We have some questions. So I'm going to ask this first one. I'm going to read the whole question and then I can break it down. This person had a lot of good questions within this one bigger question. So, hello, I am curious if that's always nice. Hello. I am curious if there are any primary accounts from Lenape women who were married out to colonists. Was a good question. Was there money dowry exchange? Were these marriages by consent? Remaining on the land is vital, of course, but was there any other exchange of goods, services, land, money? Did these women actually remain on the land? Were they allowed to be the same stewards with the same esteem in colonial settlements as they held in Lenape settlements? I mean, that's an epic question. And there were like 5 questions within that. So I don't know if you want me to go over it again, but I feel like you got it.
I did, and
Okay, good.
thank you, because I do get asked about that often. They are very important questions, and uh, I'll try to hit them all briefly. Unfortunately, we do not have many direct written accounts. Of course, we don't have any of the earliest accounts of these women or their families. So a lot of this is up to, I don't want to say speculation because that makes it sound arbitrary, but a lot of it you have to piece together from the spirit of the time and the environment and the zeitgeist. What we do know is that the some of these marriages, some of these relationships, and particularly some of the very early ones, did seem to be very genuine. There were definitely some families that seemed to share genuine feelings and come together in a good way among the early colonists and Lenape women. And one example, in my area, I live in the Poconos of Pennsylvania, and this area was largely settled by German farmers. And the Germans seem to have particularly good relationships with the Lenape. Our people got together very well. Of course, not in all cases. And of course, there are other races that we got along, or other ethnicities we got along with as well. But there is a story that we uncovered in the University of Pennsylvania archives that tells about a Native American and a colonist who were about to have a confrontation, and the colonist speaks out in German. And when the Lenape person heard that, he put his weapon down and he asked him in German, "You speak German? Kannst du Deutsch sprechen?" Or something. So I probably mangled that. And
Oh, sprechen Sie Deutsch.
thank you. That's
Yes.
it.
I do know a tiny bit of German, but sprechen Sie Deutsch would be, yeah.
Oh, good. I only know it from reading this story.
You had it, you had it.
But knowing about that background, then they came together in friendship. So there were definitely some marriages that were genuine. Now, it is very easy to assume that many of those marriages were more coerced as a way to be able to stay here. Now, we don't have records of Lenape women who wrote, these were my conditions, this is how I felt about my husband. Unfortunately, we don't have those kind of accounts, but especially going into the era of Penn's sons, when our people were being chased or brought in and scalped or brought into slavery, it is very easy to assume that many of those marriages, our women were doing whatever they could do to stay in their homeland. And moving forward, in the larger frame of the community, the answer to that next part of the question, were they continued in the colonized Lenape-Hoking, where they continued to be held as those cultural stewards and those environmental stewards? No, they were not. Like I said, our people were trained not to be Lenape, to leave those heathen ways behind them. So life in the colonized Lenape-Hoking was it was two-faced. You had your colonial face that you put out to society, and you kept your Lenape face for your family, and you kept that very quiet.
Okay, the questions keep rolling in. So the next question is, and by the way, thank you for the answer to that. And I was saying in the chat to one of the students, Lenape Gardens. We're going to talk to you. We're going to talk to you about that. Okay.
Excellent.
What are some way, right? So this goes to the other bit that I knew was going to garner at least one question. What are some ways for folks to support Lenape language efforts? Do you welcome, encourage anyone to try to get involved with your language classes, or is it better for folks from outside the culture to support in another way? And I think this is an interesting question because, you know, I get this too a lot with sort of like allyship, right? And is it better to be, which is where I feel like this very sensitive person is going with this. You know, is it better to be an ally? Can you support in other ways, but not, you know, accidentally, you know, misappropriate? I was curious about that too, in terms of, can others learn the language? Is that not, you know, welcome or permissible? So yeah, I knew that was going to come up, and if it didn't, I had written it down.
That's another wonderful question, and coming from a wonderful consciousness. So thank you for asking that. And what the answer that I will keep coming back to in all questions about towing this line between being an ally and appropriating, the key to all of that is getting in touch. I find most often the difference where the line crosses over to appropriation is when people cross the line from working with us to speaking for us. So the key is to ask us, get in touch through the website, email us, and as long as you're working with us, we can help you and work together in ways that you can support and not appropriate. But to answer that specifically for the language, you are more than welcome. Anybody who is interested in the language is more than welcome to join. And Heather, is it possible, I see the chat prompts pop up quickly on the bottom of the screen, but I don't have the chat open. Can you give people the website?
Yes, I'm going to. Yes.
Great. Okay.
I have it on my screen. It's your I'm looking at contact Lenape Nation, and it's Lenape-Nation dot, no, is that it? Is that the right one? Lenape-Nation.org. Yeah, that's the one that I have.
Yep, Lenape-Nation.org.
Beautiful. Yep. Good. Okay, that's exactly. I'm putting that in the chat right now.
Right. And our email is just info@that. But you can email us through the website.
And random question, do y'all have, besides, I know you have a Facebook page, do you have like an Instagram page or a Twitter page or any of that? Or if people are looking for you beyond the website, Facebook, I know you do have a Facebook page, which is very lively.
We do.
Yes.
We are unfortunately not great we're not situated very well technologically right now. I'm actually the person who runs our website, which is just ridiculous. There's no reason that should be me, except none of us are very qualified to run that kind of thing. We are working with some interns, and we're trying to get more of a social media presence. So hopefully that'll be coming. But no, right now it's just the website and the Facebook.
Okay, and I have a feeling you might be getting some offers or some help from that from some of the students that are in here now that work with me. So we'll be in touch with you in case we can be of any assistance to you with any of that.
Wonderful. And if there are students out there who want to get involved, I particularly love working with students, and I love working with students in a way that also help their academic careers. The student who spearheaded the exhibit we did at the University of Pennsylvania, she went on to win the Rhodes Scholarship.
Wow.
Obviously not just because of the exhibit, but I like to think it was one of the feathers in her very impressive cap.
Wow.
I'm working with some interns out of Haverford right now on an exhibit we're putting up there, so I love to do that kind of thing. So please, students and anyone, feel free to get in touch. Okay. But yes, as far as the language class, anyone is free to take it. We love hearing people learn the language. You don't have to be Lenape to learn the Lenape language. Other ways you can support, my mother used to teach the language at Swarthmore College for 5 or 6 years. Then the funding dried up. So for that program, unfortunately, we're always looking for an actual academic college venue to teach the language. So maybe you don't want to take the language, but you can find a way to support the class. Please feel free to get in touch about any of that.
Oh, I'll definitely be in touch with you about that. I might work at a college or two. Definitely one. Maybe they'd be interested. Okay, so next question we have is thank you. Oh, it's a great question. Thank you, Angel. Thank you so much for sharing. I work in environmental education. I have reached out to a few Lenape members to invite them to share their authentic experience with people in our park, but nothing has come of it. Ah, so you did not get in touch with Adam. Okay. Do you have a suggestion for anyone to contact you with a question mark? Now you're getting there, Angel. Who would be interested in sharing firsthand information about the Lenape people with our community? You just answered my question, but I wanted to share the question anyway. So I guess you're saying you did offer to do that, you answered it, but you wanted to ask it anyway. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I struck the lottery when I got in touch with you by finding your website. So I feel very fortunate. I'm imagining you're busy. So would you be a good person though for Angel, for example, to reach out to and then see where it goes?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
great.
Now, I want to reinforce that we are not the only Lenape nation. You can also look up our other nations, our two nations in New Jersey, our nation in Delaware State. Those are the Eastern Homeland Lenape who still live here. You can also look up our nations in Oklahoma or Wisconsin or Ontario, Canada. So remember that my nation is not the only Lenape nation. We have relations all over the country and continent. But if you would like to get in touch with me, like I said, I am very oriented. Our nation tends to be very oriented in public engagement and educational opportunities. So I am one of the people that you are welcome to get in contact with.
Okay, beautiful. Next question, and I will take a couple more because I feel like we could just again, I know I said this before, but I really just several questions have come in regarding like the gardening. So that I feel like itself could have its own session or whatever. But I do hope that you will come back and there are others that want to hear from you. All right, next question. In addition, is there much information about traditional Lenape land stewardship and caretaking techniques? See, I think that's a really interesting question. Is there much about that?
Not an incredible amount. And there's a number of reasons for that. Now, there are some things, some wonderful examples. Many people may have heard of, for example, the Three Sisters planting method.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
yes, which is just ingenious, and it's a way of planting together beans, corn, and squash in a harmonious way where as one crop starts to die, it begins to replenish the nitrates in the soil that the other plant uses and feeds on. It's just an incredible example of how our people, and specifically our women, how they knew how these crops worked with the land before, of course, there was any scientific language for nitrates in the soil or anything like this, just from thousands upon thousands of years of working with the soil. So there are examples like, for instance, Three Sisters planting. That would be a method of planting that would take up very small tracts of land and replenish the soil. There are some of our traditions. For example, whenever a Lenape person would hunt or forage, it it was I don't want to say common practice. It was etiquette. It was the way you did these things. That you never took the first thing you came across. So if you were hunting for deer, you would never shoot the first buck you saw. You would let that buck go. Or if you were foraging for um, mullein, you would never pick the first mullein bush you came across. You would continue on until you found another one. And that was always a way of making sure you were leaving something behind that could reproduce and continue its existence here, that you weren't taking the last that was available for the community.
Mm.
Now, as Storykeeper, I can tell you in every one of our stories, in our oldest stories of creation, down to our seasonal ceremonies that we still practice today, they all have threads of environmental stewardship, of ways we would take care of the environment. And many of our stories are cautionary tales. They tell of times that we were irresponsible, or we were not behaving in a way that was good for the environment, and we paid the price. And we tell stories of how we relearned our ways. So that consciousness exists in our stories and by example. But what you don't have are books of, these were the environmental practices of the Lenape people. And that there's a number of reasons for that. Again, one is because we didn't have a written language. We didn't have written things like that. Knowledge was passed down culturally through our elders. But also, um, a general consciousness and appreciation for all of our relations was mostly all it took to be cultural stewards in our time. We didn't have to worry about industrial pollution. We didn't have to worry about microplastics and how to handle that. All
Mhm.
of these things were, of course, introduced. Um, and this is one reason why the river journey and being invited into contemporary environmental organizations who have their finger on the political process and on these industrial processes, that's why it's so important for us today, because it has become very much more complicated to be an environmental steward in today's world, and those relationships really help us maintain that role.
Wow, that's a great answer. And it's really important to keep that in mind, because if you think about what we're facing today versus 200 years ago, there's a lot more moving parts, and also a lot more moving parts outside of one's control. So that's really interesting. Okay, last question, I guess. So this one is, thanks for sharing the website. Back to gardens. Is there some sort of seed exchange? How does one help keep these historic plants alive? So I was wondering that too, when you talked about, the gardens we just mentioned, and some other possibilities. This feels a little bit like going back. I almost feel like partially I can sense what you might say about this, with the notion being, reaching out to the Lenape Nation, right? And like not just going off on your own and kind of doing whatever and then saying, oh, I have a Lenape garden. But the key being to really sort of be collaborative with the Lenape Nation about what we're doing. But what say you, Adam, about this?
Yeah, we are happy to advise on that kind of thing. And just some of the examples of things that have been done, you can look up, you can Google the Lenape Garden at the University of Pennsylvania. That was one of our first projects, and it's a wonderful space. Um, And what you'll find at a place like that, it's kind of like a little courtyard area in an outdoor space, not incredibly large, but we have different Lenape food and medicinal plants there. And we have labeling in the Lenape language what their Lenape names are. Um, and now that can stretch all the way. We're working right now with another college who has acres of land, and they're talking about actually raising traditional Lenape crops, food crops and medicinal crops, but making food from them and making it kind of a living Lenape agricultural site. Um, Signage in Lenape language, we love to do that. We can, if you're interested, sometimes we put up plaques that just give brief information about how the plant would have been used by us, whether it was food or medicine, and what we would use it for. So all of those things are possibilities. So yes, please get in touch, and we're happy to explore that.
There's a theme here. Okay, so I'm going to take us off of Facebook Live. See, this is like the after show. We are Facebook Live. I want to thank you so much, and Paul, we're getting lots of comments in the chat here about thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing. So I'm going to take us off of Facebook Live and then we'll wrap up in here. This is the first time you've been with us. I guarantee if you are amenable to it, it will not be the last. Thank you so much for your time. This was incredible. All right. Goodbye, Facebook Live. Bye-bye.